Mortal Kombat is a worldwide phenomenon, and it has been ever since its inception, so it makes sense that, just as it is with everything else that is successful, there have been tons of games that have tried to imitate the fighter franchise's most successful aspects. Some games have succeeded at that to various degrees, while others have failed spectacularly. In this feature, we'll be taking a look at the most terrible Mortal Kombat copycats we've ever seen. Survival Arts. Survival Arts wanted to take the ideas of Mortal Kombat and blend them with everything from ninjas to aliens. The end result wasn't nearly as interesting as what it sounded like on paper. The most important thing in any fighting title is, well, the fighting. Survival Arts failed miserably on that front, and no amount of gratuitous blood could salvage the mess that it was. Shadow: War of Succession. The 3DO is an absolute goldmine when it comes to bad Mortal Kombat knockoffs, or really, bad games in general. So here's another one for you. Speed and pace is often paramount in fighting games, but Shadow: War of Succession clearly did not get that memo. It was slow, sluggish, and an absolute nightmare to play through. The fact that it tried to market its horrendous visuals as the exact opposite of that does the game no favors either. Time Killers. Time Killer deserves some credit, I guess, for its varied roster of characters, on paper at the very least. But in terms of simply playing it, it was just an absolute mess, which is the last thing you want to hear about any fighter or any game, really. With its one button per limb controls, it felt very clunky to operate, and sure, that's been used in other fighters too, but Time Killer is perhaps the worst example of these kinds of controls. Way of the Warrior. Naughty Dog have become the industry's top dogs with the likes of Crash, Jak, Uncharted, and The Last of Us over the years. But at the beginning, things weren't quite so good. One of their earlier projects, back when Naughty Dog was just 2 people, was a terrible 3DO fighter called Way of the Warrior, and it really was terrible. Cheap FMV cutscenes, clunky mechanics, horrible visuals, and a litany of bugs absolutely buried this game. Ultra VORTEK. Ultra VORTEK is like a hodgepodge of hastily put together Mortal Kombat-y elements, done so in the worst way possible to deliver a truly unflattering knockoff. Ridiculous characters, bizarre lore, and over-the-top fatalities have been the hallmarks of Mortal Kombat forever, and Ultra VORTEK figured it could one-up the real deal by taking it all one step further. Of course, it didn't. It took things too far and ended up just being weird and annoying. BioFreaks. BioFreaks is probably one of the most interesting inclusions on this list because it comes from Midway Games themselves. The game was marketed quite a bit, and no doubt Midway had hoped for it to become the next big thing. But rather than making an original, decent fighter, they decided to make a game that ripped off their own Mortal Kombat generously. On top of that, they also decided to stuff the game full of weird, poorly implemented gimmicks, making the entire thing just a disappointingly broken experience. Street Fighter: The Movie. A video game adaptation of a film adaptation of Street Fighter II, which is actually a Mortal Kombat ripoff. What? Creating this game should have been easy enough. Just take the foundation of the phenomenal Street Fighter II and build on it. But no, Street Fighter: The Movie's video game adaptation ended up being a clunky, broken mess with its blend of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat mechanics. KASUMI Ninja. KASUMI Ninja isn't the worst Mortal Kombat clone in the world. It's pretty bad, sure, but it's bad for very ordinary reasons. It suffers from terribly slow and cumbersome gameplay, which is dragged down even further by sluggish controls. While visually, it's not much of a beast either. I mean, that's not the most ringing endorsement for a game, but as compared to some of the others we've looked at in this feature, it doesn't sound half bad. XENOPHAGE. These are all Mortal Kombat clones on this list, but none more blatant than XENOPHAGE. Though it tried to put a space sci-fi twist on the formula, it was very clearly a cheap knockoff, with absolutely horrible gameplay, ridiculous characters, some bizarre moments of humor that will also make you cringe more than they will make you laugh. TIMESLAUGHTER. TIMESLAUGHTER, to be fair, had a pretty interesting concept. It filled its roster with characters based on various points of history, or fictional history, ranging from Dracula to cavemen. It could have done some interesting stuff with that concept, but of course, it didn't. Not only was it an absolute nightmare to play, it also looked horrendous. It's still worth checking out if you want to see how bizarrely awful games can be at their worst, I suppose. Cosmic Carnage. Cosmic Carnage had the not-so-original and terribly overdone idea of putting aliens in a Mortal Kombat clone. The unoriginality of that idea, coupled with the unoriginality of being yet another Mortal Kombat clone, could still have been overcome if it was at least a decent game. Except, it wasn't. There were some interesting ideas in there, but Cosmic Carnage never did anything with them, instead choosing to be a very generic combat clone. Bloodstorm. The creators of Bloodstorm were quite confident about what they were working on, very blatantly calling it a Mortal Kombat killer. But it didn't do that, of course. It ended up being little more than an uninspired ripoff of a much better game, and it didn't even turn out to be a very good ripoff because it was just not a lot of fun to play. MACE: The Dark Age. MACE: The Dark Age isn't just a Mortal Kombat clone. It also imitates mechanics seen in other franchises such as Samurai Showdown. But while it borrows a great deal from many other games, it doesn't do any of those things nearly quite as well. Surely a game could have come up with something interesting with all of those elements it lifted from a number of different other fighters, but that, sadly, is not what MACE did. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.